Bismarck is quite a large battleship for her era. She is about 250 metres in length, which is fairly impressive, and 30 metres in the beam, so she's wider than a lot of contemporary battleships.
At the end of May 1941, some of the world's most powerful warships jeweled in the middle of the Atlantic. It was to be one of the last great battles of the era of naval gunnery.
An underwater drone just entered the Admiral's suite of the Bismarck, the one room inside Hitler's most powerful warship that no camera, no submersible, and no expedition had ever been able to reach. The ship has been sitting 3 miles down on the Atlantic floor since 1941. Completely dark, completely sealed. And when that drone finally squeezed through the crushed corridors and pushed past the door, the high-definition cameras captured something so terrifying, it rewrites everything we thought we knew about this ship's final hours. Sitting on Admiral Lutyens' desk, perfectly preserved in the freezing darkness for over 78 years, were documents, signal logs, and a handwritten note in the Admiral's own writing that prove both Germany and Britain have been running the same cover-up since World War II. Neither government wanted anyone to see what was inside that room. And once you understand what those cameras recorded, you'll know exactly why they needed it to stay buried at Ipoh at the bottom of the ocean. 3 miles down, April 2019. A research vessel sits motionless in the deep Atlantic, roughly 400 miles west of Brest, France. Below her, the ocean floor drops to 15,700 feet. Nearly 3 miles of crushing black water where the pressure reaches 6,000 pounds per square inch. It's perpetually dark, near freezing, and somewhere down there, sitting upright on an underwater mountain slope, is the wreck of the German battleship Bismarck. Marine archaeologist David Mearns is running the operation. Mearns isn't new to this. He's located dozens of deep wrecks, including the Australian hospital ship Centaur and the cruiser HMAS Perth. He understands warships, he understands German engineering, and he understands something that every expedition before him failed to accomplish: getting inside the Admiral's suite. Robert Ballard found the Bismarck back in 1989, the same man who discovered the Titanic. His cameras filmed the exterior and revealed something that stunned naval historians. The hull was remarkably intact. No massive holes where British shells should have penetrated below the waterline.
The final element, of course, was her speed. That long, thin hull was meant to purchase a very high speed.
Ballard suggested the crew's own scuttling charges sank the ship, not British firepower. British veterans were furious. Arguments erupted across naval journals and documentaries for years. James Cameron brought more advanced ROVs in 2002. He found evidence of internal explosive damage consistent with scuttling. But even Cameron's technology couldn't navigate the collapsed, debris-choked corridors leading to Lutyens' command center. Paul Allen's research yacht tried again in 2016. Same result. The Admiral's suite stayed sealed. Every expedition hit the same wall. The corridors were too twisted, too blocked, too dangerous for the technology of the time. Ballard couldn't get in. Cameron couldn't get in. Allen's team couldn't get in. For 30 years, the one room that held the answers sat right there, and nobody could touch it. But Mearns spent over a year designing a next-generation ROV specifically built for wreck penetration. Custom sensors, custom size, custom maneuverability, equipment that didn't exist even 5 years earlier. His team ran simulations based on the wreck surveys from every previous expedition, mapping the most likely routes through the interior, identifying structural weak points, calculating exactly how much clearance the drone would need to thread corridors that had been collapsing for decades. And for 3 weeks in April 2019, they worked inch by inch, clearing debris, mapping collapsed passages, threading the drone through crushed metal corridors that no human or machine had touched since the Bismarck hit the ocean floor 78 years before. Then, on the final week, they reached the sealed door, and what they found on the other side would demolish the official history that two nations had maintained for 8 decades. But to understand why those documents are so devastating, you need to know what the Bismarck actually was, and what really happened to her in May 1941, the ship they couldn't stop. Here's the short version, and every detail matters for what comes next. The Bismarck launched in Hamburg on February 14, 1939. 41,700 tons fully loaded, over 800 feet long. 8 15-inch guns capable of hurling a shell weighing nearly a ton over 20 miles. Armor belt nearly 13 inches thick. Top speed, 30 knots. She wasn't just a battleship. She was the most feared warship in the Atlantic, and she carried Hitler's obsession with German superiority in every rivet.
The German Navy in the Second World War, the most important thing to realise about it is it's terribly small. Most notably perhaps in Norway in 1940, when they used almost their entire fleet to transport an army and carry out a surprise attack on Norway.
Admiral Günther Lutyens took command in May 1941. Career officer, 52 years old, brilliant tactician. His mission, Operation Rheinübung, was devastatingly simple. Break into the North Atlantic with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and destroy the convoy routes keeping Britain alive. Cut that lifeline and Britain starves. Churchill knew it. Hitler knew it. Lutyens knew it. On May 23rd, the British found them in the Denmark Strait. The next morning, the battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, moved to intercept. At 5:55 a.m., a Bismarck shell plunged through the Hood's deck and detonated in her magazine. She sank in under 3 minutes. 1,415 men killed, 3 survived. Let that number sit with you. 3 men out of over 1,400. The British Navy went berserk. Every available ship, every aircraft, everything they had now hunted the Bismarck with a single burning purpose: avenge the Hood. She was wounded. A lucky hit from the Prince of Wales had ruptured fuel tanks, and Lutyens turned for occupied France. For 2 days he evaded pursuit, his captain Ernst Lindemann executing brilliant evasive maneuvers. Then Lutyens made a fatal error. He broke radio silence, transmitting a long message to naval headquarters. The British intercepted it. Their direction finders got a bearing. A Catalina flying boat spotted her 700 miles from safety. On the evening of May 26th, ancient swordfish torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal, biplanes that looked like they belonged in the First World War, pressed home their attack through intense anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo jammed the Bismarck's rudders 15 degrees to port. That single hit sealed the fate of every man aboard. She could only steam in circles. The crew tried everything, freeing the rudders, rigging emergency steering, using the propellers to control direction. Nothing worked. The final battle began at 8:47 a.m. on May 27th. The battleships Rodney and King George V closed from 12 miles down to just 2 miles, pounding her into a burning, silent wreck. Shell after shell tore through her superstructure. Her turrets were blown apart one by one. Fire control destroyed, bridge demolished. The Bismarck fought back at first, her guns still lethal. But the systematic destruction was overwhelming. By 10:15 a.m., every gun was dead. The heavy cruiser Dorsetshire fired 3 torpedoes into her hull. At 10:39 a.m., she rolled over and sank. Of 2,200 men aboard, 114 survived.
The guns fired one last eerie salvo, a final act of defiance from a doomed gun crew. The pride of the Royal Navy, the most famous ship in the world, sank beneath the waves.
Hundreds more were left thrashing in the freezing water when a U-boat scare caused the British to abandon the rescue effort. Now, here's where both sides started lying. The British said their shells and torpedoes sank her. The Germans said the crew scuttled her to prevent capture. Both versions were convenient. Both were incomplete. And both nations maintained their stories for decades because the real evidence was sitting in a sealed room 3 miles underwater. If you're watching this far, you already sense something is very wrong with the official story. Hit subscribe right now, because what that drone found in the Admiral's suite is about to make it a whole lot worse. Inside the sealed suite. The Admiral's suite wasn't a single room. It was a complex of interconnected spaces. Lutyens' sea cabin, his chart room, his office, his personal quarters, all designed for centralized command, with direct access to the bridge above. This was the nerve center of the most powerful warship in the Atlantic. Every major decision in the Bismarck's final days was made within these walls. When the Bismarck sank, something remarkable happened. The suite apparently sealed itself, whether by design or by sheer chance, creating a pocket that slowed the flooding enough for items inside to settle gently, rather than being ripped apart by explosive decompression. The cold, the pressure, the total absence of light and oxygen. Together, they did something nobody expected. They preserved what should have been destroyed decades ago. The ROV cameras pushed through into the chart room first, and the scene stopped everyone on the research vessel cold. It was frozen in time. Charts still lay on the plotting table, held down by brass weights. A parallel ruler sat exactly where someone had last used it on the morning of May 27, 1941. Pencil marks still visible, positions still plotted. As though if someone had just stepped away from the table and never come back. But here's the catch. Those charts showed the Bismarck's track marked hour by hour, and the final positions, written unmistakably in Luchen's handwriting, did not match the German naval staff's official records. The discrepancy was roughly 15 nautical miles. That might sound small, it wasn't. It meant Luchen's had been deliberately misreporting his position in his final transmissions to his own headquarters. Think about that for a second. Why would an admiral lie to his own command about where his ship was? The ROV pushed deeper into his personal office. Filing cabinets had spilled open during the sinking. Document cases lay scattered across the deck. The team spent hours, filming every visible page, every scrap of preserved paper, page after page of records that the German Navy never wanted anyone to see again. And among the wreckage, they found something that changed everything: the signal logs. Complete records of every radio message sent and received during the Bismarck's final hours. Those logs are what blew this entire story wide open. The 3 messages. In the last 12 hours before the Bismarck sank, Luchen's received 3 separate messages from Naval Group Command West, the headquarters coordinating operations from Paris, and each one was worse than the last. The first arrived at 11 p.m. on May 26th. Routine. It acknowledged the rudder damage and promised U-boat assistance was on its way. Standard wartime communication, nothing that would raise an eyebrow. The second arrived at 2 a.m. on May 27th, and get this? It ordered Luchen's to scuttle if capture seemed imminent. That part was standard procedure, but attached to it was a classified addendum that has never appeared in any published German war diary, ever. In 80 years, not a single historian had seen this document. That addendum ordered Luchen's to destroy all classified materials immediately, not if capture seems likely, not when the situation becomes hopeless, immediately, right now. At 2 a.m., with the final battle still more than 6 hours away and the ship still capable of fighting. Why was Berlin panicking about classified materials when escape was still technically possible? Why destroy documents hours before any boarding threat? The answer came in the third message. It arrived at 4:30 a.m., just over 4 hours before the British opened fire. It ordered continued radio silence, which Luchen's was already observing, but buried in that message were specific scuttling procedures and a direct, emphatic order. The ship must not be captured intact under any circumstances. The language wasn't standard military phrasing. Mearns's team described it as borderline desperate. This wasn't contingency planning. Naval Command wasn't preparing for the possibility of losing the Bismarck. They had already accepted it. What terrified them wasn't the ship going down. It was someone getting inside her before she did. 3 messages in 6 hours, each one escalating, each one tightening the noose around a ship that still had over 2,000 men fighting aboard her. Now, here's where it gets insane. Luchen's response to these messages survived. It was found in his personal log, sealed inside a metal case in his office, and his notes expressed open confusion about the urgency. He wrote that, while capture was possible, it was by no means certain. The ship could still fight. They might break away if circumstances shifted. His assessment was calm, professional, tactical, the words of a man who hadn't given up. But between the lines, something darker was forming. His notes showed a man slowly realizing the truth, that the High Command knew something about the Bismarck's design, about her classified systems, that they were willing to sacrifice the entire crew to protect. Something aboard this ship was more valuable to Berlin than 2,200 lives. And then the cameras found it. Sitting in the margin of his final log entry, in Lucian's own handwriting, 6 words that prove the cover-up. They know something I don't know. An admiral of the German Navy, commanding the most powerful warship in the Atlantic, writing in the margin of his own log, in his final hours alive, that his superiors were hiding something from him. Something important enough that they had already decided his ship and every single man aboard her were expendable. That one sentence, preserved in freezing darkness for 78 years, is the most terrifying thing that drone captured inside the Admiral's suite. Not because of what it says, but because of what it proves about what happened next. What they were protecting. The Bismarck carried classified technology that both sides understood was worth more than the ship itself. Her fire control systems integrated radar and optical range finding in ways no other navy on Earth had achieved, her armor incorporated. Experimental metallurgical techniques that the Germans believed gave them a critical war-altering advantage. Techniques that years of cutting-edge research had produced and that could not be replicated quickly if captured and analyzed. These weren't incremental improvements. They represented a generational leap in naval weapons technology, and Berlin knew that if the British got their hands on those systems intact, that advantage was gone forever. So German high command made a calculation, a cold, deliberate calculation. If the Bismarck couldn't escape, she had to be destroyed, completely, before the British could board her and strip those systems apart. The crew was secondary. The technology was everything. That's the German cover-up laid bare. Naval Group Command ordered the scuttle not in the final chaotic minutes, as the official story claims, but hours before the last battle even began. Lutyens was ordered to fight until crippled, then destroy the ship, not attempt. Every possible escape, not try to save his crew, fight, then scuttle. The survivor testimonies about demolition charges and open seacocks were absolutely true, but the decision wasn't made by brave sailors in their final desperate moments. It was made by officers sitting safely in Paris who had already written off 2,200 men to protect engineering secrets they considered more valuable than human lives. But here's the deal. The British had their own lie to maintain. Post-battle analysis, now confirmed by the physical evidence documented on the wreck, showed that British shells and torpedoes, while devastating to the Bismarck superstructure, turrets, and weapon systems, had not penetrated her main armor belt in any significant way. The hull damage that actually sank the ship came from internal explosions and flooding through deliberately opened seacocks. The British guns destroyed the Bismarck as a fighting ship. They absolutely wrecked her above the waterline, but they did not sink her. And the Royal Navy could not admit that, not publicly, not then. They had just lost the hood, the living symbol of British naval supremacy, to a single shell from this same ship.
The Royal Navy was all about sea power and sea control, controlling the sea lanes and imposing its will on the enemy. Essentially, the same thing it had done in the Napoleonic Wars and during the First World War.
The nation was in shock. Public morale demanded proof that their remaining battleships could destroy Germany's best. So the official reports inflated the damage, claimed penetrating hits below the armor belt that the wreck evidence simply doesn't support, painted a picture of overwhelming British firepower, sending the Bismarck to the bottom through sheer destructive force. 2 nations, 2 lies, maintained in perfect silent agreement for 80 years. Not through conspiracy, but through mutual convenience. The truth served neither side, so neither side spoke it. Veterans who knew better stayed quiet, bound by loyalty, by classification, by the painful knowledge that contradicting official records would brand them liars or fools. Some chose their words carefully in interviews decades, later hinting at what they knew without ever quite saying it. Others carried the weight of what they had witnessed into old age and never spoke at all. The ocean kept the only proof that could settle the argument. And the ocean doesn't talk unless you send something down to listen. The letter. But the most devastating discovery in the Admiral's suite wasn't the signal logs. It wasn't the charts. It wasn't even the 6 words scrawled in the margin. It was a letter, sealed, unsent, found in Lutyens' personal quarters, addressed to his wife. He knew he was going to die. The letter made that clear from the very first line. He understood the tactical situation completely. The jammed rudder, the converging British fleet, the impossible mathematics of survival. He had done the calculations himself. There was no escape route, no miracle waiting over the horizon, no rescue coming. A man staring at his own death with total, unflinching clarity. But what drove him to sit down and write in? Those final hours wasn't the battle ahead. It was what he had just realized about the men who sent him there. The letter described the classified features of the Bismarck that High Command was desperate to protect, systems that post-war German records would later claim never existed or were insignificant. He laid out, clearly and precisely, the technology his superiors in Berlin valued more than the lives of everyone aboard his ship. He named the systems. He described their significance. He explained why Command was so terrified of British capture. He wrote about duty, about following orders even when those orders meant certain death for every man under his command, about the weight of leading sailors into a battle that his own headquarters had already decided would end not in rescue, not in escape, but in deliberate destruction. Not to achieve a military objective, but to keep secrets locked inside a sinking hull. And he wrote about hope, that someday, when the war was over, someone would find the truth, that people would understand the impossible choices forced upon him, that his crew, the over 2,000 men he was about to lead into annihilation, would be remembered not as casualties of a naval engagement, but as men deliberately sacrificed by their own command to protect technology that Berlin valued more than German blood. That letter sat in a flooded room at the bottom of the Atlantic for 78 years. Photographed by ROV cameras in April 2019, it proves, in the Admiral's own words, that the official narrative printed in every textbook, carved into every monument, and repeated in every documentary for 8 decades was a carefully constructed fabrication, maintained by two nations for their own purposes, regardless of the truth. Why this can't stay buried? Every historical account of the Bismarck written before 2019 was built on falsified records. Every single one. Every documentary, every textbook, every museum exhibit. Historians writing. In good faith, repeated information that both Germany and Britain knew was wrong, incomplete at best, outright fabricated at worst. The Bismarck was not simply sunk in battle. She was not purely scuttled in a defiant final act. She was sacrificed by her own command to protect technology they valued more than 2,200 lives, then finished off by British guns that were less effective than the Royal Navy claimed, but devastating enough to complete the job. Both sides lied. Both had reasons. And the ocean kept the proof locked away in total darkness under 3 miles of crushing pressure until technology finally caught up with history's secrets. It took 78 years. But the truth doesn't expire, it just waits. Lutyens' letter, the signal logs, the damage reports, the charts, they all survived because they sank beyond human reach, preserved by the same crushing cold and darkness that kept them hidden for nearly 8 decades, the same deep-sea exploration technology that found the Titanic, that mapped underwater mountain ranges, that discovered new species in the abyss. That technology finally became the tool that forced the truth into the light. What nations bury, the ocean preserves. And what the ocean preserves, eventually, someone finds. There were always 2 stories, the one they told us, the neat, heroic version that both sides agreed to maintain, and the one Günther Lutyens carried with him to the bottom of the Atlantic on May 27, 1941. For 8 decades, only one version existed. Now, both are on the table. So here's the question, and I want your real answer in the comments. Should every page from that suite be released to the public? Should historians get full, unrestricted access to what that drone captured? Or were both governments right to bury the truth and protect the legacy of the men who died? Tell me what you think below. If this is the first video of ours you've watched, hit subscribe. We pull buried secrets like this into the light every single week. And smash that like button so more people see what 2 governments spent 80 years trying to keep at the bottom of the ocean.